We are following a developing story that has sent immediate shockwaves through Washington, Ottawa, and across the Atlantic to the headquarters of NATO. In the last hour, reliable sources close to the situation have confirmed that former President Donald Trump has issued a direct and unprecedented urging to the Canadian government. The demand is clear, specific, and politically explosive. He is calling for an immediate, large-scale diversion of Canadian nuclear fuel supplies to the United States to combat what is being described as a critical looming energy deficit. This is not a standard trade negotiation. The language being reported suggests a pivot toward treating Canadian uranium reserves as a necessary extension of American national security assets. The reaction from Ottawa has been swift, terse, and unexpectedly firm. Instead of the diplomatic ambiguity usually seen in high-stakes North American relations, Canadian officials have issued a brief statement emphasizing national sovereignty over natural resources and existing export commitments. This rigid pushback against a prominent U.S. political figure has immediately raised eyebrows in diplomatic circles. We are seeing real-time reactions from Brussels, where NATO allies are scrambling to interpret what this rift means for the unity of the Western alliance. If the United States and Canada, two of the closest allies in history, are openly clashing over the fundamental building blocks of energy, the implications for global security are profound. This story is moving rapidly. Yet we are seeing energy markets react, with uranium spot prices showing volatility in early trading hours. But beyond the financial numbers, the political narrative is shifting. This is no longer just a conversation about energy policy. It is shaping up to be a test of the modern geopolitical order. The question being asked in intelligence briefings and corporate boardrooms right now is simple yet terrifying. If the United States faces an energy cliff, how far is it willing to go to secure the fuel it needs? And what happens when its polite neighbor to the north simply says no? To understand the magnitude of this morning's breaking headlines, we must step back from the immediate noise of the press releases and look at the quiet, desperate crisis that has been building in the American energy grid for months. The headlines you see today regarding Donald Trump's pressure campaign did not happen in a vacuum. They are the inevitable result of a collision between American energy consumption and the harsh realities of the global nuclear supply chain. For years, experts have warned that the U.S. demand for electricity, driven by the explosion of artificial intelligence data centers, the electrification of the transport sector, and the revitalization of domestic manufacturing, was outpacing the grid's ability to generate baseload power. The solution, on paper, was always nuclear. It is carbon-free, consistent, and powerful. But there's a bottleneck that few outside the industry discuss: the fuel itself. The United States has the reactors, but it has largely allowed its domestic uranium enrichment capabilities to atrophy over the last 3 decades, relying heavily on imports. For a long time, this wasn't a problem. Markets were open and supply was plentiful. But as geopolitical walls have gone up between the West and Russia, a major supplier of enriched uranium, the United States has found itself in a precarious position. The leverage has shifted. The lights staying on in New York and the servers running in Silicon Valley are increasingly dependent on fuel that comes from outside American borders. This brings us to Canada. To the north lies Saskatchewan, home to the Athabasca Basin, often described as the Saudi Arabia of uranium. It is high-grade, stable, and theoretically friendly territory. However, the assumption in Washington has always been that Canadian resources would naturally flow south when needed. What former President Trump's recent maneuver exposes is that this assumption may no longer hold water. By publicly urging, and some say pressuring, Canada to prioritize American needs over other international contracts, he has stripped away the diplomatic veneer. He is articulating a raw, America First energy doctrine that views Canadian resources as vital strategic assets for the U.S., regardless of Ottawa's prior commitments to Europe or Asia. The timing of this intervention is critical. It comes at a moment when the former president is solidifying his platform around energy dominance and economic security. By targeting Canada, he is signaling that energy security is not just about drilling for oil. It is about securing the fissile material necessary to power the next century. But the Canadian response suggests a significant miscalculation of the northern neighbor's current political climate. Canada is currently navigating its own pressures, balancing relationships with European allies who are desperate to wean themselves off Russian energy, and Asian partners looking for long-term stability. When Ottawa issued its response today, stating that its resource strategy is determined by Canadian interests, not foreign demands, it was a shot across the bow that resonated far beyond Washington. This standoff has triggered a deep anxiety within NATO. The alliance relies on the absolute cohesion of the North American bloc. The US and Canada are the fortress behind the Atlantic shield. Defense analysts are now quietly expressing concern that if energy resource nationalism begins to drive a wedge between Washington and Ottawa, the logistical backbone of the alliance weakens. Logistics, after all, win wars and secure peace. A dispute over uranium is a dispute over the fuel that powers the naval reactors and the grids that support the military-industrial complex. If the two nations cannot agree on how to share the fuel of the future, their ability to coordinate on broader security threats comes into question. What makes the situation particularly volatile is the lack of a clear off-ramp. The former president has rarely been known to back down from a public demand, viewing such moves as a sign of weakness. Conversely, the Canadian government cannot afford to look like a vassal state capitulating to American pressure, especially with their own electorate watching closely. We are witnessing a collision of two immovable forces, the insatiable energy hunger of a superpower and the sovereignty of a resource-rich nation that has decided to draw a line in the sand. As we dig deeper into the specifics of the reported demands, sources indicate that the urging involves not just raw ore, but prioritized access to refined fuel, the very bottleneck that is squeezing the U.S. utility sector. This suggests that the former president's team has a granular understanding of exactly where the supply chain is broken. They aren't asking for favors, they are identifying a strategic vulnerability and demanding that Canada fix it. This level of transactional diplomacy is jarring for career diplomats who are used to handshake deals and quiet assurances. It forces the question, is the era of the special relationship between the U.S. and Canada evolving into a relationship based on leverage and necessity? The ripples of this news are already reaching the communities that form the backbone of the nuclear industry. In the mining towns of northern Saskatchewan, there is confusion and anticipation. These are communities that have powered the world for decades in relative obscurity. Now, they find themselves at the center of a geopolitical tug-of-war. Union leaders and local officials are reportedly seeking clarification from Ottawa. They want to know if their output is about to become a political bargaining chip, or if their existing contracts with utilities in France, Japan, and South Korea will be honored. The uncertainty is palpable. A disruption in export quotas to satisfy American demands could lead to legal battles and a loss of reputation for Canada as a reliable global supplier, a risk Ottawa seems keenly aware of. Meanwhile, inside the United States, utility companies are watching with bated breath. These companies are under immense pressure to deliver reliable power without hiking rates to astronomical levels. They know that without a secure stream of fuel, the ambitious targets for AI growth and green energy transition are dead in the water. For the average American consumer, this high-level diplomatic spat translates to a very real fear, the stability of their monthly bills and the reliability of their power. If the U.S. cannot secure this fuel, the cost of electricity could spike, leading to inflationary pressure that hits every household from Ohio to Arizona. The technical details of uranium enrichment may seem distant, but the economic impact is sitting right at the kitchen table. We must also consider the silence from other global players. China and Russia are undoubtedly watching this fracture in the Western alliance with keen interest. A divided North America is a strategic opportunity for adversaries. If the U.S. is forced to look elsewhere for fuel, or if Canada is alienated from its southern neighbor, it opens the door for new alliances and shifts in the balance of power that were unthinkable just a few years ago. The silence from Beijing is loud. They are waiting to see if this crack in the alliance widens into a chasm. This geopolitical tremor is not just shaking the halls of government. Its vibrations are being felt on the concrete floors of the control rooms that manage America's power grid. To understand the human stakes of this diplomatic rupture, one must look at the men and women charged with keeping the lights on. Inside the nuclear facilities dotted across Illinois, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas, the mood has shifted from routine vigilance to a quiet, gnawing anxiety. Plant managers are staring at fuel inventory logs that, for the first time in decades, feel finite. These are not individuals prone to panic. They are engineers trained to manage risk. Yet, the prospect of a supply chain interruption from their most reliable neighbor introduces a variable they cannot engineer their way out of. If the fuel bundles done at T arrive on schedule because they are held up by a trade war or a political standoff, the reactors must power down. It is a binary reality. Either the fuel is there or it isn't. The impact ripples outward from the plants to the factory towns and tech hubs that surround them. We are talking about the potential for rolling brownouts in a digitized economy that never sleeps. Imagine the manufacturer in Ohio, already operating on thin margins, suddenly facing energy surcharges because the utility company has to bid against France or China for spot market uranium. Imagine the data centers in Northern Virginia, the physical brain of the internet, being told their power stability is no longer guaranteed. This is where the abstract world of international diplomacy crashes into the living room of the American family. The conversation about Canadian uranium is eventually a conversation about the cost of keeping the refrigerator running and the Wi-Fi on. The frustration is palpable because the solution, the fuel, is sitting just across the border, yet it feels increasingly out of reach. On the other side of the 49th parallel, the human narrative is equally complex but fundamentally different. In Canada, This pressure from the United States is stirring a deep-seated nationalistic sentiment that transcends political party lines. For the workers in the uranium sector, there's a mix of pride and apprehension. They know their product is world-class, vital, and increasingly scarce. But they also worry about becoming pawns. If Canada acquiesces to the pressure, they fear their industry becomes a subsidiary of American policy, subject to the whims of Washington's election cycles. If Canada resists, they fear punitive tariffs or border slowdowns that could cripple their local economies. The Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan, who are key stakeholders and partners in these mining operations, are watching closely. Their agreements are based on sustainable long-term partnerships, not emergency requisition orders from a foreign power. Their voice in this dispute is a reminder that these resources are not just commodities. They are part of the land, governed by treaties and legal frameworks that cannot simply be swept aside by a demanding press release. As we widen the lens to look at the long-term consequences, the damage to the North American relationship may be the most lasting casualty. The border between the United States and Canada has long been cited as the longest undefended border in the world, a symbol of unparalleled trust. But trust is a resource harder to replenish than uranium. By treating a strategic ally as a stockpile to be raided, the former president's approach risks fundamentally altering the DNA of this relationship. We are looking at a future where energy cooperation is replaced by energy protectionism. If Canada feels it must guard its resources against its closest friend, the logic of North American integration begins to unravel. We could see a pivot where Ottawa accelerates its diversification strategy, locking in long-term binding contracts with European and Asian markets, specifically to insulate itself from American unpredictability. The irony would be profound. In an attempt to secure America First energy, the U.S. might inadvertently drive its neighbor to put America last. This scenario creates a nightmare for NATO planners. The alliance is built on the assumption that the North American industrial base is a unified, frictionless machine. A fractured energy policy across the continent creates logistical seams that adversaries can exploit. If the U.S. grid is unstable, or if political friction slows the movement of strategic materials across the border, the collective defense capability of the West is degraded. We are entering an era where energy security is indistinguishable from national security, and currently, the two pillars of the transatlantic alliance are out of sync. The silence from European capitals is not disinterest. It is the holding of breath. They realize that if the U.S. is willing to strong-arm Canada over fuel, the guarantees extended to Europe might be equally fragile. Reflecting on this unfolding crisis, we are witnessing the harsh dawn of a new era of resource scarcity. For decades, the Western world operated under the illusion of abundance, that we could always buy what we needed, provided the price was right. That era is ending. The physical realities of the planet are catching up with the infinite growth models of our economies. Whether it is lithium for batteries, copper for wiring, or uranium for reactors, the race is on to secure the physical building blocks of the future. The conflict between Donald Trump's demands and Canada's refusal is not an anomaly, it is a preview. It is the first of many battles we will see as nations realize that soft power means nothing without the hard assets to back it up. The narrative of the 21st century will likely be defined by who controls the flow of energy. We used to think of energy wars as things that happened in distant deserts over oil pipelines. Now we are seeing the prelude to an energy conflict between two polite, democratic neighbors. It challenges our understanding of stability. It forces us to ask what happens when the polite veneer of diplomacy is stripped away by the raw existential need for power. The United States is waking up to a vulnerability it largely ignored, and its reaction is shaking the foundations of the post-war order. As night falls over the mining basins of Saskatchewan and the bustling power hubs of the American East Coast, the machinery continues to hum, for now. But the certainty that underpinned that hum is gone. The wires that connect us are buzzing with more than just electricity. They are vibrating with tension. We are left with a stark realization. The most dangerous shortage facing the world right now is not just uranium, it awes cooperation. When the lights flicker, it won't matter whose political rhetoric was louder. All that will matter is who controls the switch. And right now, for the first time in history, the hands on that switch are wrestling for control.